I'm a landscape architect. Probably most of you are architects. So I would like to start with a small introduction into the history of my profession. And as you all know, there was not a first house, but the first space on Earth was actually a garden. And it's important to understand that it wasn't a landscape, it was a garden. It was this kind of, no, I don't need for this one, I don't need the music. There is music to it as well, but I don't need, thank you. And gardens are interesting because they cover a very human analogy of being in the same time wild and tamed, being in the same time dangerous and civilized, being in the same time culture and nature. And this kind of balance or ambiguity, twilight, if you want, twilight zone, is actually what is so human about gardens and why people actually like gardens so much, and probably also why they became a kind of an origin of almost every religion. So this is like, so the first source or the first tradition for us landscape architects in the end is this kind of almost religious space. As you all know, so the next thing is, as the paradise garden is a kind of, is like the belly of your mother, you know. It's a place in which there is no hunger, there is no cold, there is no warm, so it's actually perfect. And this kind of perfection, you know, probably no one of you remembers being in the belly of their mothers. And the reason we don't remember is because we were completely happy. And Paradise Garden is a kind of a situation like that, in where there is no needs, no, everything is perfect. But obviously to create this perfection is some kind of godlike situation. And if you want to copy this sensation, in a sense you have to kind of go back into childhood, into babyhood, into something else, into something that creates a different scale, that creates a different sensation. So being in a garden is supposed to take you out of the real reality into a supra reality or surreality that is different. So one of the issues we work with is also scale. Things in gardens are often smaller or bigger than in reality, to create these kind of sensations. So, jumping in big steps, probably the most influential style in landscape architecture till today, that became more or less an archetype of parks, is the Romantic movement, the English garden. And in this movement you will see that there are all these elements of scale. Things are smaller than in reality. You know, the temple in the back is like is not a real scale. It's a bad copy of the real stuff. And what is interesting about the English landscape garden, there are two issues that are really important about the English landscape garden. One is the issue of dynamism. The English landscape garden works as a system only with movement. So you move through the garden. You know, this style is also called the picturesque. So you move through the garden from one picture to the next. Okay, it's like a movie, but instead of the movie being running in front of you, you move actually through the movie from one scene to the next. So every frame creates a picture. And the other thing that is interesting is the dissolution of borders. You know, the English landscape garden, in difference to the Baroque and to the Renaissance garden, and to gardens in general, you know, etymologically, the word garden means guarded space, a space that is protected. Paradisos comes from Persian and means walled space. So the origin of the garden being its border gets dissoluted in this garden. And this is a very important issue that, if you like, continues till today. The dissolution of borders is a ever-going movement in architecture and culture. If you want industrialization, globalization, the idea that things are not anymore clearly subdivided, but in a constant move and in a constant changing of borders or dissolution of borders. So these two things make the English landscape garden very interesting. Theoretically, practically, obviously, because it has been copied so very often, it became a kind of a big misunderstanding. because when these gardens were created in England of the 18th century, the landscape around them was pretty different to themselves. So there was a difference. Now the whole of England, the whole of the world, if you want, is a big landscape garden. So and what makes these gardens also very modern is that that the picture was there first before the reality was. So Nicolas Poussin and Claude Lorrain were two French painters who motivated this garden style. So they were English aristocrats. When they saw these pictures, they said, I want to have a garden that looks like these pictures. And the immanent quality of these pictures was their eclecticism. The idea that you can combine things, that you can copy-paste things. And gardens have been, in many cases, exercises of creating identity. If you want to create an identity, you just put together the pieces that you need to make this identity become something new. And if you make a garden, because garden plants have roots, gardens give more the sensation of identity than maybe a building, because a mere building, you can think, okay, it's here, but it could be taken out. But trees have give the sensation that they've been put there by nature, by God. So they create this kind of rooted sensation that they are so strong also for identity. However, these paintings you can see, they also work with infinity, they work with the dissolution of borders, and with this kind of Elysian, paradisic equalities in which, you know, woman, man, military, priests, whoever, you know, the sheep, you can see the sheep in the back, the shepherd lives there as well. So everyone is happy, and you create this kind of perfect environment. And this is what gardens are about too. Or in that one you can see you have the Vesuve, you have the Castle of the Angel from Rome. So you can mix things the way you actually want. And this is the idea, the very postmodern idea in the end of the English garden, the very interesting thing. The other issue is this cloth glass. The idea that you have something to enlarge. The cloth glass after Claude Lorrain was a mirror with a frame. Like, as I said, the garden needs the wall to become a garden. The picture needs a frame to be a picture. Otherwise, a picture is not a picture, because it wouldn't have a beginning and an end. So what they used to do to create this kind of filmic experience and the idea of the dynamic of experiencing the garden, they used to use this mirror, and they used to sit somewhere and then capture the best picture, their best picture. So this kind of individualization of the experience, something that is very common to us today. And maybe this cloth glass is a kind of a predecessor of the iPhone. It's this kind of, let's say, enlarger of reality, or interpreter or individualizer of reality. And they also used to use these guys to walk. So they would use them to walk, and then they would have the future in front of them, the past behind them, and the present where they would be standing. So this kind of experiencing space in motion, experiencing space in movement, what seems for us very natural, and it's the way the world works for us today, had its start maybe in this garden style. So the idea that you create a picture before you create actually an identity is also something that is very common to us. Today you have a PR campaign, you have the picture before you have the place. You have the narrative before you have the identity. So in the case of the Rocky Mountains, without the pictures of Adams, no one would have cared for them. So the pictures actually create a desire, create identity of places, and it goes so far, this kind of shift between what is a real picture, what is an after picture, and what is reality becomes more and more confusing. As you might be, you might know the movie The Lord of the Rings, and this is the village that was built in New Zealand to do the movie, and it was supposed to be destroyed after the movie. But then tourists, people who were in love with the movie, started to come and asking where this village was. So that now one of the biggest attractions of New Zealand, that doesn't have to do anything with New Zealand, is this little village of the hobbits. Yeah, And also the national air carrier of New Zealand is now the official carrier of Middle-earth. Yeah? So here you see how reality gets transformed by the narrative. So we have a movie, and the movie that is actually a fantasy creates a reality, and that reality becomes a confusion because you don't know, are we in a real place, or is this just a fake? Or where did the fake actually started? You know, where was so we get into a kind of flow of narratives, of pictures, of realities and surrealities, and this thing is very human. We all live out of the narrative. Jesus is probably the biggest narrative and the most successful one. Half the earth is Christian and believes that this guy hanging on a cross, half naked. So that was really, I always think if it was a woman, if she would also be half naked, but I don't know if that would become such a big religion then. That's another story. So we are all used to this idea of, I don't know if they understand me because that was a joke actually, or it's too late, or they don't get a clue out of the English. However, so this idea of creating a narrative before creating reality. That reality in the end is changeable. Reality is not nothing given, but reality is something that we can change and we can manipulate, and that's also our role as designers and architects. So this is probably the worst Italian export to the United States, is Sylvester Stallone, very bad actor. You know, this movie was really very important for a generation. This guy fought his way up. You know, he really trained the whole day, and from being like poor, he made a career just out of his passion for sports, whatever. It's the new narrative of the American dream. And so the whole story happens in Philadelphia. This is the Museum of Art of Philadelphia, where he goes up and down. And Philadelphia is one of the big tourist attractions in America, one of the cities that people, Americans especially, like to go to, because it used to be the capital of the United States before Washington became the capital. And so, however, when they go to visit Philadelphia, they also visit a monument to Rocky. So, but Rocky actually never existed. So we are commemorating a very bad Italo-American actor, you know. So this idea that reality is being more and more forced into this kind of flow, and more becoming this kind of filmic reality, that we actually become more and more part of a big movie, and we never know exactly if we are participating in the movie or if we are actually watching the movie. It's a similar experience you would have in the English Landscape Park. So you would be in the same time an actor as you would be a consumer. And this is maybe what makes this English Landscape Garden as a theme, as a theory, so incredibly interesting. This is another example how movies influence also the way we experience space. So the idea that moving through the space, experiencing the space in motion, that was again starting to be an issue with the English Landscape Garden, because you have to imagine that the space before that was much more static. The space before the English Garden was a frame, and the activity, the dynamism, were the people in that frame doing something. Like in the Baroque garden, you would have maybe a festivity with the king and his people. They would play a kind of a theater in a stage. Okay, so from that kind of static idea of space, we suddenly have this kind of idea of flow. And what changed between the 19th century and today is that the velocity. And with the velocity, actually every landscape becomes an English landscape garden, because we experience the landscapes in motion. And to create this kind of sensation, we also hear music. So music becomes more and more part of our half filmic experience. When we go to do sports, when we sit in the car, we listen to music and have this kind of soundtrack to the experience that we are having. So we are having this kind of half filmic experience as well. Yeah? The dissolution of borders, if you want, is also the idea of the American suburb, that there is no need for a wall. We all know that these borders obviously exist. there are social borders. We know all Americans obviously have weapons. So if you put your feet on the grass, you're dead. So you know that. So you don't need that. So sometimes social borders are much stronger than real borders. You know. So and this is part of the development. In that case, there you see how the dissolution of borders also happens between the private and the public. There's a crisis in the private, because the private is not anymore protected as it used to be. The private is now vulnerable with media, controllable. You know, everything you do with your computer is being recorded. So there is no private security anymore. The walls around you in your apartment are not protecting your privacy anymore, because your privacy is constantly exposed through media and controlled through media. So if you don't need your house anymore, you also can have privacy in the park, okay? And actually, the television here creates the privacy. The people with the television feel much more private than if they would be surrounded by walls. And this is 1968. So the project that I'm going to show to you is a park in Copenhagen, and the driver of this project, or the task for this project that started as a competition, was integration of immigrants. So, in thinking of how to deal with this issue, one of the motivations for us was the European history of emancipation. You know, when people speak about immigrants, people speak a lot about integration, but in the end, in my opinion, the term we should be using should be much more politically correct, in the sense that it would come from the immigrants. You know, when it came to the emancipation of women, no one would say, let's integrate the woman into the men's world, okay? But it was always a question of emancipation. When you thought of the emancipation of the Jews in Europe, it was always an idea of making them members of the society without them losing their traditions or their ideas. So, like for the woman, without losing their feminine being, obviously. Yeah? So there is always a history of emancipation. We have the proletarian emancipation, the woman emancipation, the Jewish emancipation. Even children are emancipated now. So the question is, how can we help an emancipation of immigrants? Because in the end, as you all know, it's very. This project is already several years old, but now all the issues of immigration became more and more relevant. And for us, I think in Europe, it's not a question of if, but a question of how. And the question of how is if we want to have immigration, let's say, as a violent encounter, or if we want immigration to be a civilized process, okay? And we have the chance to influence this. And with emancipation, it happened too. Emancipation, if you do not manipulate it and cultivate it, becomes revolution. Then you have people putting bombs and killing each other. If you find a way of cultivating, then you can create a more peaceful and more sustainable development. So, however, these are some sheets to show the immigration movements in the world. We all know that America obviously takes a lot of immigrants, but you can see Germany is the third country regarding immigration, and that is from 2013. I think with 1 million immigrants that year. Also, immigration became pretty different, and a question of all classes, by the way. You know. I mean, you are architects, so probably 50 to 60% of you might have to learn English first, and then might have to go to another country to work because Italy is not providing work for you. So, but in the moment that but you also might come back, or maybe you would go to a country and then change your country. So the idea of immigration as a single street doesn't work anymore. Maybe you go to study for 2 years somewhere, and then you come back, and then you go somewhere else, and then you come back. So it's becoming more and more a kind of traveling circus, if you want, an EasyJet traveling circus through the world in which we move, and then on certain points maybe we got stuck somewhere. But the idea that we are born in a place, grow up in a place, and stay in a place till we die is probably in times of globalization very difficult to imagine. So the question is how does actually the public space has to react or can help in this development. And another thing that we were finding out is that, and we can see that now too, that European societies have the tendency to, or not only European societies, in general societies or people have tried to repress cultural attitudes, things that people are scared of. So the burqa, for example, in France is forbidden. Not that this is a very nice thing. Or in Switzerland, which is a country of turbo-democratic qualities, actually minarets got forbidden by a vote through the people. It got a majority, and it was started by architects actually saying that the minarets don't fit in the historic Swiss cities. Okay, so actually the Swiss don't have cities anyway, but doesn't matter. It's another issue. So, and you can see actually they look a little like missiles, So there is a kind of misunderstandings around immigration, around extremism, around all these kind of things, and people are scared, but people are always scared, and fear is never a good friend, So how can we create less fear between cultures? And so the idea for the park that I'm going to present to you is a park that is in Copenhagen, in the north of Copenhagen. You can see this is the Baltic Sea, and in front you see this the red square. It's a long park. Superkilen, Kilen in Danish means wedge. I don't know if you know what a wedge is, but it's like a thing that you use to maybe to spalt wood. And it used to be a tram line area, and the neighborhood around this park, and this is actually the starter, is a neighborhood with 95% immigrant population. And the task of the competition was how to create a park for this special context. So this was not our idea, to create a park for the immigrants or for this neighborhood, but it was a given task by the competition. So for us it was a question: how could we, what kind of a strategy would we have to apply to do that? So we said another thing, when you migrate from one country to another. I don't know if you when you move from one country to another, you take yourself with you. Maybe you have a bag, but all the objects that surrounded you, maybe all your childhood, etc., all these objects, and obviously the cities in which you lived, they stayed behind. So the idea was, why not to use the let's say the tradition of the English landscape park as being a kind of a transcultural mix, a transcultural potpourri. Why not using this idea and transporting it or misusing it nowadays as a carrier for cultural differences? Okay, so and this when you don't have these objects that you had every day beforehand, you also feel more lost. Okay. And the idea was to give the immigrants a space for their objects somehow. And in the same time, because we are humans, we are curious, to give the city a place where they can look at the immigrants, and see that they are also humans and that they also have fun or are stupid or whatever. And this kind of encounters, that's one of the reasons we travel, because we like to see other people and how they actually live. We are curious to see other people do things. So how to misuse this natural curiosity, the tradition of the English park, and as a third thing, the task of this talk today, that is the idea of participation. He already made me the question he wanted to make me after the talk, so I'm sorry, there are no questions after the talk. Yeah? It was how to create, how to motivate the people to participate, okay? And in that case, participation is a cultural issue. You need education to participate, okay? You need to know how to create an opinion. Okay, if you are foreign and you come maybe from a very poor society, maybe you can't read, and also you have other problems than the park next to you. You're looking for jobs, maybe you are illegal, whatever. So that's even worse than having some boring Italians to be participating, who probably would prefer to go shopping or watching television, watching some Berlusconi television. So in this case, the immigrants, They have other problems. So our idea, we tried actually to do the traditional participation way. It didn't work. So we said we have to establish a hedonistic participation concept. And the hedonistic participation concept, the basis that the joy that we have with projects, I mean, you're all architects. You know, there are three phases in architecture, and they're maybe similar to partnership or let's say, okay, I give you an analogy. It's a little bit, you know, a good architectural project maybe starts with a competition. And as a competition is a little bit like sex, okay? So it's fun, you are really passionate about it. It can be short or not that short, yeah? And maybe some one of you two get pregnant, okay? So that in that case you won the competition, okay? You made your sperm become fruitful and you win the competition. Then you're pregnant, but pregnancy is pretty boring, you know? You carry the baby and it's like you have to do exercises and you get fatter and fatter and fatter. And this is all the process of planning. You have to go to the city, you have to talk to the people, so you have to go through all this process of pain, let's say. And then the construction site comes. This is giving birth, the butchery, you know, blood, screaming, you know, and so on. But then the baby is there, the project is finished, and everyone is happy. Okay? So this is the same process that we have in architecture. So I would ask you, where do we participate with the people? That's my question for you. Hello? Where do we take the people into participation? In which part of these three steps? No. Do you have sex with the people? No, impossible. That wouldn't be appropriate. And that would be, and I mean, you are an Italian macho. Maybe you have a lot of yeah, but still. No. In the end, sharing maybe. No. In the end, we participate with the people in the least joyful moment. Okay. When the baby is there, it's our baby. Sex, obviously, we don't have sex with the people, okay? So we let them participate in the pregnancy, okay? We do like breathing exercises with them. So we thought that's actually wrong. We have to, and the biggest joy, obviously the sex is also joy, but the biggest joy and the most sustainable joy is when you have a project built. The moment in which an idea, just an idea, becomes reality. This moment is the biggest moment of biggest joy when you are an architect or a designer, to see the thing as a thing, you know, and then it's cool. So, and we said, if we enjoy that, the people will enjoy that too. So the idea was to set up a system to ask the people to propose objects from their cultures, so that everyone would also create ownership. So instead of having discussions about la città, la blah blah, le arbere, le blah blah blah, yeah, that we have in this stupid participation stuff, we said, why don't you propose something? Okay, so what are you missing from your country? What would you like to have here that the stupid Danes don't have? What can you provide here that this space doesn't have? Okay, so then we set up a homepage, etc. And people had to propose objects from different regions. That worked partly and partly not, but I'm going to come back. So this was the first images. You can see no tree, no pavement, no object was Danish. So like the people around in this neighborhood, nothing in this park was Danish either. Yeah? Even the advertisement was not Danish. So nothing that would remind you of where you actually are. And this is very much the idea of a good garden. A good garden has to take you away from the reality of the surroundings of it. You have to be somewhere else. Gardens lost this ability because the whole world became a garden. And the gardens got diluted in this kind of situation. But there's a chance to create this kind of anti-spaces, or in that case, this kind of globalized parks. So these are the participation processes. These are the 100 objects that we in the end had. And so, as I said beforehand, the idea of participation with a homepage didn't work. So we started to go. We had 5 translators for the main 5 languages spoken, and we went from door to door. So it's also a question of work, the question of participation and of money and of resources to do it. No? So we went from door to door and say, please, we want an object, because we didn't have enough objects. So in one of these situations, we had this guy. He came, he opened the door, he was in underwear, yeah, and wanted to close actually immediately, but then the translator started to talk to him and started to explain him, we're doing this park, and we're trying to collect objects from every culture, etc. So this guy from Muscat said, actually, I know what I would like to see in the park. My uncle, he's a dentist, and he paid me to come to Denmark. So I would think it's great to have maybe his if we could put this thing in his in the park. So we immediately took that idea and built it in Copenhagen. But you know, as I said beforehand, scale is a big issue. Scale and translation. You know, when you immigrate, one of the processes in your mind that happen is that you translate. Translating is a process that creates half understanding and half misunderstandings. But out of that, new things appear. In that case, the objects are translated too. You know, the English landscape garden, we call now English. All the temples, all the objects, all the plants even in the English landscape garden are not English. They are imported. But in the moment that a tree grows in England, it becomes different than when it would grow in Canada or in Lebanon. The cedar, for example, the beautiful Lebanon cedar. What would be an English garden be without a Lebanon cedar? You know? And so we said, if trees, objects can become, from being foreign, can become part of a tradition, like in England, yeah? Can we restart this process? So in the end, and you know, there is even a transformation of your face. When you speak a certain language, so you not only transform your brain, but also your physiognomy starts to change, you know? You know, for example, the French, you know what the French do? You know when they speak? It's the only nation that farts when they speak, you know? They're like, c'est la vie, okay? So that's the reason they have these thick lips, okay? Or the Americans, you know, the Americans, because they speak English not like me back here, but in front here, that's the reason they get these potato faces, like hamsters, you know. And you Italians, I don't know. But as you are not laughing about my jokes, I'm not going to make a joke about you. So, and, but the idea is that this transformation that we experience in our body, because culture transforms form, yeah, in us, to take that strategy of transformation, translation, into the process of this project. So in the end, then this object becomes Danish. It's cool, it's perfect, it's beautiful, it has a Nordic beauty, it's clean, yeah, but still it has also the memory of where it came from in form of the symbolism of the Islamic half moon, and etc. And obviously, as a third, and it's very important, cultural understanding only happens if every culture can laugh about itself. So humor is also a very important issue. So in that case, instead of having the star in the half moon, or the half moon as a religious thing, we have a tooth, yeah, in it. So also this kind of humoristic element is important. So, and we have a lot of these kind of elements. It's a donut sign. So the question is Citroën a real firm, or is it part of the park? And can I buy donuts here or not? So this kind of confusion between reality and surreality is important. So I'm going to rush through. So you can see different elements, different languages. This is the plant concept. Also, all the plants are foreign and work together with the color concept of the three spaces. We have a red square, a black square. These are Lebanon cedars and palm trees. Thanks to climate change, we have these Chinese palm trees growing in Copenhagen. And you know, the idea of where are we? This is one of the most important questions of today. It's really hard to tell. So, and you could say, okay, we should try to create things that that are more autochthonous, and we think that to be autochthonous means to grow out of a tradition. But if in a neighborhood 50 nations live together, you know, and there is actually no one tradition, so you have to create a new one through this mix, okay? And so this is the idea for this space. Yeah. This is from Italy, actually. This one. This is the lamp. Yeah, that's another story. But we just go on. These are the different objects that we built into the space. These lamps. This is a lamp that was behind the wall in Berlin, yeah, and so we copied that into the space. You can see it behind the moon. Yeah. Here comes the moon again. Yeah. This is a lamp from London. This is from America. This is from China. Because advertisement is becoming more and more, if you want to be related to a place, mostly the biggest difference now happens in advertisement, I would say. Because architecture gets more and more equalized, the products get more and more equalized, but advertisement somehow still has this kind of cultural resonance. There is also a Superkilen app that you can use because the objects are there, and if you're interested in knowing about the story behind the objects, you can use the app to Google them and to look them up. Yeah. So that this, like the cloth glass that I was talking in the beginning. These swings are from Iraq. So another issue that we were interested in dealing with this space is maybe what I like to call a psychoanalytical approach. When you go to a shrink and you have a problem, they say you have to redefine the way you look at your problem and make out of your problem maybe something, a character in the best of the cases, okay? So it's not about solving the problem forever, but trying to cultivate the problem, to make the problem part of yourself and not a problem anymore, okay? One of the problems of this neighborhood was noise. Neighbors would complain because kids would be too loud on the space with ghetto blasters, etc. So instead of forbidding the ghetto blasters, we actually placed this giant ghetto blaster from Jamaica. But this giant ghetto blaster has a certain volume, and it also turns off during the siesta, the midday sleep time, and after 10. Okay, so that in the end, instead of forbidding, we just kind of tried to change the way of the problem, okay? And also you can obviously turn up the volume when there's a party on the square or other things going on. Yeah? So this is the idea of that. Then there is a boxing ring, violence. If violence is a big issue in this neighborhood, there's a lot of criminality, people are poor, people are stressed. When you move from one country to another, you had bad experiences. And aggressions or violence is something very thin and to be very clearly differentiated. If someone hits you on the face on the bare ground, this is violence. When someone hits you on the face 40 centimeters above ground with a ring of strings around it, then it's sports. Okay? So this is also how so violence is a problem, but violence is also the attraction of this neighborhood as well. So how can you play with these issues? You are not going to solve them. You are going to catalyze them. It's like a catalysator. You're going to filter them, in the best of the cases, in something more acceptable, even if it comes from the same source. So these are some impressions of the space. This is from Japan. This is an octopus. It's a typical thing in Japan, Sometimes it's also about translocation as a strategy. Something that is normal in a country becomes very, very special in another place. Yeah. So the Japanese have octopuses everywhere, but here you can see how the people adapt to our color concept. Thank you for laughing. So this, as you heard beforehand, I was born in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, and our biggest hobby is to grill, to barbecue, and so that came from me. So I proposed 3 barbecue places, and it's also about the use and the program of the space. What is allowed in public space and what isn't? Most of these immigrants live in small apartments and have big families. So the idea and they also have this kind of Mediterranean attitude to space. So they like to see the public space as a continuation of their living room, okay? And so, and if you see people cooking and eating, then you immediately think they're okay, So we had weddings here. People go there for their birthday, to have barbecues here, etc. So suddenly that also changed the attitude of the space a lot. These are the palm trees again. There's a Moroccan fountain. This is from Palestine. This earth from Palestina. What you see red there, is earth that we brought from Palestine, and these are just films of this, because 5 of the objects, the box ring, the earth from Palestine, the boxing ring, the loudspeakers, the bull, we went with the people who proposed them, we went to their country and picked up the object, okay? So, speaking of participation, this is obviously it's more fun than if you go to say, Signora, che le piace la piazza? No, non mi piace. It's more fun if you say, you come with me and we go together to Thailand and get a boxing ring from Thailand, you know, or earth from Palestine or whatever. So this is also what is really relevant for this project. It created, through this participative process, also a narrative that gave the project already a certain fame. Because if you do something as stupid as taking some stupid immigrants with you to pick up objects in their country, something like that comes in the paper, okay? And then suddenly you have a narrative of a space that was a forgotten space beforehand in a very poor neighborhood, and you started to have this story told in advance. Yeah? This is from Turkmenistan, a bus stop. This is the same bus stop in Copenhagen, and there is an Arabic sign saying bus stop, but there is no bus stopping. Yeah? So this guy is waiting there already for a while. Yeah? And so the narrative becomes part of the project, and this is maybe the conclusion that comes from the beginning of the presentation, that you have to create a story around a project, and it's not anymore just, in many cases, not always, but it's not enough just to do a good project that looks fine. That is obviously still necessary, but the narrative around it is as important as the project. So let's say the second life of the project is as important as the project, because the second life of the project brings back the success that the space needs to be accepted. So the immigrants who live in this neighborhood, there used to be no people going and visiting this area. Suddenly you have visitors, tourists, mainly architects, going to see this project, okay? So then suddenly the attraction created is good for us as an office, because we get invited to non-English speaking audiences, yeah? But, and it brings us new jobs, but it's also good for the neighborhood, because it brings the neighborhood success. So you can see it's in the official site homepage of Denmark as a project. It's in the official site of Copenhagen. It has a Wikipedia page. It has 5 million results if you Google it. So it's probably the landscape architecture project with most Google results ever, more than the Highline. It had a lot of exhibitions, nominations, publications, etc. It was even in CNN, the strangest public park in Europe, and now it's the 10th most visited site of Denmark. So it's like if you take the Tivoli and whatever the other sites are. So Superkilen became like the number 10 of the attractions for tourists. So from being a forgotten neighborhood, it's more. There's a book about it, and then there was also a coincidence. There is a school, and one of the teachers of the school took pictures of it and sent them to Apple, and Apple made them without our intervention part of their campaign for the new iPhone 6. And so suddenly the picture of the picture that was the fake of the repetition of the confusion and translation became quasi translocated into the world through this campaign. And here you can see this is Alexanderplatz in Berlin, the S-Bahn train station. This is in Hamburg. This is in Milan. You might have seen it. This is in Tokyo. This is the highway in San Francisco. This is in Los Angeles. This is in Bogota in Colombia. This is in Chile. There's a bus stop, actually, you can see. And then it was in the back side of a German magazine of the Süddeutsche Zeitung. That's a big national paper. And it was also on the back of the New Yorker. That is also a big national paper. So here you can see how let's say the resonance space for a project, how relevant this is to create a resonance space. It's the same when you play music, you know. If you would have a violin without the body, there wouldn't be music, no? So in architecture, I think projects of, especially socially motivated projects, need resonance space. Thank you very much. Grazie mille.